One decision I made plunged my nation into a civil war, made me the most wanted man in Minecraft, and nearly destroyed this entire server. But how did this happen? It all starts with my nation, the Hewitka Federation, our leader falling ill, and a goddess on the server who promised prosperity and hope for his recovery. While on an early morning stroll in the Hewitka capital city of Tlahatl, Infinite began to feel a bit hazy, and he started to hallucinate. According to nearby witnesses, Infinite began speaking to imaginary figures, claiming they were the ghosts of his ancestors. Over the following days, the situation took a turn for the worse. As Infinite's hallucinations began to plague him more and more over the following days, the more people began to see that he was unfit to rule a country in this state. He began making unnecessary public announcements to the nation, explaining that Hewitka must begin a noble conquest, with the excuse that his ancestors told him so. The leader of Hewitka was descending into complete madness. The people of the nation were obviously upset, and Hewitka would have been on the verge of fracturing in half if it wasn't for the heir regent to the throne, Juan Koyo. When Juan saw Infinite fallen well, he quickly sent him to the nearby island of Tepetle to get treatment from Hewitka's best doctors, while he temporarily took his place as the representative of the Hewitka throne. The nation was stable for now, but like I said before, the people were very upset at seeing their leader's health failing. But there was one person that was more upset than anyone else, and that was me. As Infinite's condition worsened, the more I, Tiwantio, feared for my friend's health, and the darker my thoughts got. Constant nightmares clouded my mind, and there were so many restless nights. But then she gave me hope. Entropy spoke of magic dairy, and a food found deep within the moon's core, known as lunar cheese, said to contain magical healing powers. Desperate to save my friend, I believed her. But like any deal, there was a catch. The only way to get the cheese was to destroy the moon altogether. She promised me she would help me get the cheese and save Infinite, and all I had to do in return was worship her. I accepted her deal. Entropy showed me what seemed like a poorly made sketch. I didn't know this at the time, but that sketch would be the rocket that would bring the moon and Rathnir to its knees. You know what else will bring you to your knees? The RedFireRex merch store. I got a merch store now.
Bruh.
I have stickers, shirts, and some exclusive stuff commemorating the series. Link in description.
Bruh.
A few days went by and I hadn't heard from Entropy at all, and I started to get worried that she wouldn't hold up her end of the deal. When suddenly, early in the morning on March 5th, 2021, one of Entropy's minions visited me. I greeted the spirit, but it didn't respond. Instead, it just gestured me to follow it, so I did. It led me out to sea, and after half a day of sailing, I followed it to the southern shore of the Hewitka state of Sneedistan. Just off the coast of the continent of Siltor was a mysterious island that I had never seen before. When I landed on it to take a closer look, I noticed that the island's beaches weren't made of sand. The entire beach was made out of a bright purple rock that I had never seen before in Minecraft. I quickly started to mine a portion of the island, and while I was digging, I settled on a name for this new ore, Sneedistanium. After a bit of experimenting, I quickly realized that this new ore was powerful. It was extremely flammable, extremely explosive, and when melted down, it made for excellent fuel. And that's when I realized what the blueprints were for. The Sneedistanium was rocket fuel, and I had to build a rocket. And that's exactly what I did. After days of construction, and with a little help from Entropy's minions, I constructed what I still believe to be one of the greatest pieces of technology in Rathnir to this date. Introducing the rocket, which I called the Founder. This massive missile was filled to the brim with the extremely explosive Sneedistanium ore, and it was powered entirely by liquid Sneedistanium. As much as I tried to keep this project under wraps, it was bound to be leaked to the public at one time or another. Unfortunately, early in the morning on March 11th, my fears came true, and I realized that the rocket plans had been leaked. A citizen of Hewitka known simply as T stumbled across my rocket plans by accident and proceeded to sell the information to numerous news stations and governments across Rathnir. And within just 24 hours, the entire world knew of my plan, and everybody freaked out. There were riots in the nation of Theos Azukdal, outcries in the Empire of Arlenor. It was bad. Myself and the Hewitka government were getting denounced all across the board. We got several threats of war from multiple nations across the world, and many nations, more specifically the Flutoshania region of Olderash, even began constructing their own rockets in hopes of destroying mine. The space race had begun. The Hewitka government, who had no idea any of this was going on until the news broke, quickly sent state officials and Huang Koyo himself to check on me and to see what I was doing. And a conversation that went a little bit like this unfolded. Hey there, Rex. Oh, hey there, Juan. Welcome to Zokyo. Have you come to check out the rocket? She's a beaut, isn't she? Yeah, it is about the rocket. So, you've probably heard there's a little bit of a public outcry over your rocket right now. Yeah, I have heard that. So, I don't know if you could tell by everyone yelling at us, but this rocket scandal has absolutely destroyed Hewitka's reputation on the world stage. You've caused massive internal issues within the Federation. What are you getting at? You're not listening, mate. People are threatening to go to war with us over this. Everybody hates the Federation, and several world religions are in danger because of this rocket. Makes sense to me. So the rocket is bad. Except it's not. Why wouldn't it be bad? Rex, I'm gonna be brutally honest with you here, mate. We here at the Hewitka Federation are kindly asking you to shut this project down. I mean, do we even really know if this Luna Cheese stuff even exists? Are you calling me a liar? No, I'm not calling you a liar, Rex. You gotta understand, this is like a serious issue. You're calling me a liar, Juan. You're calling me a liar, Juan. No, you're calling that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all, Juan. That's not what I'm saying at all. You're into my state listening and you insult me. No, I'm not insulting you. What are you on about? I'm not insulting you at all. What are you talking about? You know what? I'm tired of you, Juan. Rex, what do you mean? Get out. Whoa. Get out. Get out of my state. Get out of here. Rex! Yeah, it wasn't pretty. Even after I explained to them my reasonings, almost all of the state officials disapproved of my actions for fear of war. But one state official was entirely on board. And that was the chief diplomat of the Hewitka Federation, a man known as Jedi. Jedi was another strong entropy supporter in Hewitka, and he even claimed to have been a chosen spirit by the goddess of the void herself. After this encounter, we started to become very good friends. On the evening of March 12th, the rocket successfully launched and began its journey towards the moon. When news broke about the successful launch, I knew I was in immediate danger. And sure enough, I was right. War was declared on Hewitka by over a dozen nations, and tons of mercenaries were hired to hunt me down. All unsuccessful, might I add. But there was nothing they could do. It was too late. After the successful launch of the rocket, I received a letter from Infinite in isolation. The letter explained how he fully supports my idea of the destruction of the moon, and to not listen to the world, as I was doing the right thing. In a time where it seemed that everyone had turned against me, it made me happy knowing that my dear friend and father figure, Infinite, stood by my side. Early in the morning on the 13th, my rocket, guided by the goddess of chaos, successfully struck the surface of the moon. For a moment, the sky lit up, almost as if it was day, and when the light died down, the moon was fractured and bleeding. As the moon met its fate, I sat on a hill, just staring at the sky, thinking about what I had done. Then, out of nowhere, Entropy appeared next to me on the hill, sat down, and we talked for what felt like hours. As the world cried, she reassured me. She told me that the destruction of the moon was my greatest achievement. She told me that Rasnir would come to an end eventually, and this event would change the course of history of this world, forever. After a while, she got up and left, and I began to feel pride in what I had done. But unbeknown to me, I'd fallen directly into her trap. The days following the destruction of the moon were not good for the people in the Minecraft world of Rasnir. Meteorites began to crash down, causing massive damage to infrastructure across the world. It began to rain pure blood, and several world religions were now entirely destroyed. Everyone started to point fingers at one another, looking for someone to blame. And as expected, that blame all fell down on me and the Hewitka Federation. And rightfully so. I had destroyed the moon, for the god's sake. To save and heal the Emperor, I said. But from an outside point of view, I was nothing but a lunatic. Get it? Like moon. Anyways, I was just crazy, under the spell of a very good-looking goddess. Justifiably, the nations of the world were absolutely enraged. The Hewitka Federation was in a state of disarray. The Grand Assembly, basically Hewitka's parliament, was divided on the events and the legality of the lunar crisis, as it came to be known. Some cabinet members demanded for my deportation or imprisonment for ruining Hewitka's public image, and others praised me for what I had done for the good of the Emperor. And soon enough, debates unfolded on the floor of the House that would often end in horrendous arguments or even outright violence between cabinet members. And this political divide didn't stop at the doors of the Hewitka parliament either. Individual states within the Federation began taking sides in the issue, and very quickly, within a matter of days, two very different political factions began to form. There's the anti-rocket Koyalists, led by the Hewitka Crown Prince Wankoyo, who mainly resided in the Hewitka heartlands in the center of the Federation, and the pro-destruction Entropy supporters, led by none other than me, who resided in the deep north and south of Hewitka's mainland. The Federation was already on a delicate balance as it was, and the lunar issue just amplified the Federation's divide. The tension was intense. You could literally cut it with a knife. And then... On the 17th of March, 2021, the Hewitka state of Sneedistan, as you may remember from previous videos, began to vie for independence from the Federation, but not for the reason you may expect. You see, they were entirely against the destruction of the moon. In fact, they believed in a religion that worshipped a moon goddess. But now that the moon was gone, their entire religion was rendered absolutely useless. They blamed the Crown and the federal government for what had happened, and on March 19th, the Hewitka Crown and the state government met in the Hewitka capital city to negotiate on how to solve the ongoing crisis. Hey Hewitka, our religion is gone and we want independence. Rex acted on his own. The government in no way supports his decision. But still, you let it happen within your territory. This event shows that you do not have the sufficient power and means to uphold your own territorial sovereignty, and therefore, we, the Sneedy people, are kindly requesting for our independence. Well, you can't do that. Independence is illegal under the governance section of the Hewitka Constitution. Well, about that. We hired some lawyers from Bardonia, and after a close examination of the Constitution, we found a way we could legally succeed. You see, the Constitution states that a specific Calipoli and any other internal land area are specifically forbidden from seceding from the Federation. That implies that secession is illegal unilaterally and by means of a democratic referendum. Is that correct? Correct. But it doesn't say anything about taking an area of the Federation and selling it to another nation, or in this case, a newly created one. If you sell the state their independence, it bypasses the secession law because no one is technically seceding, right? You little rat. And so, on the 20th of March, Sneedistan became independent, reforming itself into the Grand Cornflower Republic. This moment, in the eyes of many, was seen as a turning point in the Federation. Many pro-destruction entropy worshippers saw this and thought, hey, if they seceded because they believed in a different ideology, why can't we? Oh, look at that! It's March 20th. That means it's election time and we have to choose a new prime minister for the Federation. Let's see who the lovely candidates are this month. Here's Ronawak, a well-known pro-entropy candidate who pledges to do nothing about the current crisis. Good start. Bruh. Next is Homereno, another pro-entropy candidate who pledges to do nothing. And finally, the new guy on the scene here is Sumo MC, a fierce anti-entropy candidate with a strong platform focusing on fixing Hewitka and its image on the world stage. Now, who do you think won? If you guessed Sumo MC, you would be correct. In a landslide, in fact. Sumo was a fresh face to the scene. He grew up as an orphan in Hewitka's frontier town of Athenia and was relatively unknown outside of his state. But after the moon incident, he saw his opportunity to jump into politics. Unfortunately, Sumo didn't have the best start to his term. Bruh. On the day he took office, Hewitka's largest city, known as Regnum, in the state of Hemne, which had an openly Entropite governor, was attacked by foreign bandits representing an organization known as the Anti-Hewitka League, which seemed to dismantle the Federation and track me down. The Hewitka Army Reserve in Regnum was completely outnumbered, and the city was forced to surrender to the barbarians, and they swiftly began to occupy it. The army was eventually able to force the bandits out, but the city was decimated beyond repair at this point. And the funny part is, I wasn't even in Regnum. I was a few hundred blocks north in the coastal town of Farafin, so they attacked the city for nothing. After the raid, Entropites, aided by the state's governor, began to protest against the Sumo administration for allowing their city to be sacked, but the protests were quickly suppressed by the Hewitka army. This greatly bothered me and my followers, who saw the army's involvement in the Regnum protests as a major infringement on our democracy. But luckily for us, there was still hope. The chief diplomat was Jidai, my friend and an avid entropy supporter who was just re-elected. He could discuss with Sumo and get him to stop, right? During a session of parliament, Jidai made an elaborate speech on the glories of entropy and how Sumo's actions of demonizing entropy supporters were breaking Huitka's laws of religious freedom and were fundamentally dividing the Federation. Sumo was having none of it, and Jidai was publicly fired on the spot on the floor of the house. Jidai was in disbelief. Fired because of his religion. And when he first told me, I too was stunned. Sumo was taking it way too far. Jidai met me in my town of Fairfin, and I quickly called an emergency meeting with my followers and councilmen. A nation that claimed to stand for freedom and democracy was actively trying to silence those who opposed the central government. The natural balance of the Federation was destroyed, if it wasn't already, and Sumo, in my eyes, had become a ruthless dictator. All while the heir regent to the throne, Huang Koyo, sat idly by. What would the sick emperor think of this? The meeting, now known as the Entropic Accords, began. There, entropy supporters from across the Federation and across the world, as well as some squatters to the south of Fairfin known as the Lusitanians, who mistakenly wandered in, met to discuss the oppression of entropy's people and the tyrannical rule of the Sumo administration. Within literal minutes of debate, everybody realized that there was only one option that seemed reasonable. If they seceded because they believed in a different ideology from the federal government, why can't we? This quote from earlier echoed through the minds of many. The Sneeds had lit the flame. We needed to secede from the Federation. Early in the morning, on March 24th, 2021, a group of prominent individuals, Ranawak, Hamareno, Jidai, myself, one of Entropy's minions, and the leader of Lusitania who had taken a liking to Entropy, met in my house in Fairfin, and there we signed the Declaration of Independence, which outlined the rights of the Entropic peoples, declared me as president, or as I like to call it, eternally divine prophet, and formally declared the land on which my city of Fairfin stood on as the newly created independent theocracy of Entropa, a haven for all Entropites fleeing oppression from any of the four corners of the world. Also, the name of the country is like a play on words of Entropy's name. Anyway, if I wanted to secure our independence, I had to act fast. By the late afternoon, I'd organized a small militia of Fairfin and Lusitanian locals, and before Huitka could react, we sailed north and captured the key Huitka military fortress on the island of Dranomia in a short but decisive victory. And this victory marks the official beginning of the Huitka Civil War. Sumo's government was infuriated when the news reached the capital. Now that we controlled Dranomia, we could easily fight our way into the Huitka heartland. Not only that, but if we successfully gained support from other nations who believed that we now stood a chance at winning, Huitka's territorial integrity would be in danger, and his regime would collapse. Sumo immediately began pressuring his allies into passing laws restricting the worship of entropy in their own nations and encouraging them to denounce me and my movement. A coalition, headed by the server admin Athaz, was even created. You'll hear more about them later, as it ties into the Battle of Nations. I knew the Huitka army was coming for me, but I didn't know when. I quickly began hiring mercenaries, training my existing troops, and began preparing for a major campaign into the interior of Huitka's mainland. But Sumo had a plan of his own. A three-step plan, in fact, to take my capital city and end the war with very limited casualties on Huitka's side. First, he would issue a naval blockade around the Fairfin Strait to stop goods from flowing into the new nation. Second, he would take the army reserve in the city of Inari and march to retake Dranomia. And finally, he would position the Huitka army reserves in Regnum and Aeroxazon on my borders, and in a two-pronged attack, the armies would take my capital from the south. And it would have worked flawlessly if I didn't have spies in Sumo's government who leaked everything to me. Sumo's naval blockade, with help from Arlon Orizan to the north, was established successfully. That was completely out of my control. It was the southern flanks that I needed to focus on, because if those fell, it was all over. On March 26th, anticipating Sumo's invasion from the southeast, I took my troops and marched them from the Entropan town of Lisbon to the hills overlooking Regnum, Huitka's largest city, with the goal to surprise attack Sumo's army if they began to march towards my frontier. What I didn't anticipate, however, was the weather. A dense fog rolled in while my soldiers were trekking across the Argu plains, which slowed us down enough for Huitka's army to actually be prepared when we got there. But it is said that in our darkest moment, through the divine will of our goddess Entropy, the fog was cleared and we forced Huitka off the summit, sending them fleeing back to Regnum. We had secured the lunar hills and were now threatening to take Huitka's largest city. Another win for the secessionists. Sumo, of course, assumed that I would take Regnum then and there. But as he was building up forces in the city, I threw him a curveball. I repositioned a portion of my troops and began marching westward towards the underdefended Huitka town of Aeroxazon. On the way, I encountered Huitka mercenaries who just so happened to be patrolling the region, which resulted in minor skirmishes throughout the Polita Desert, and the eventual Battle of Braddockblay, which saw Huitka finally garner a victory. In the end, I successfully took the entire region and forced Huitka's troops out of Aeroxazon. Seeing how Sumo lost 3 battles and still couldn't break through my line line of defense at the Lunar Hills, I surely thought that he would surrender and allow the people of my religion to live in peace. But instead, in the darkness of the night on March 28th, he called off the naval blockade and pulled all of his troops out of Regnum for no reason whatsoever. My men marched into the abandoned city and took it with ease. The only reason Sumo would give up such a prestigious location in Huitka to a group of separatists was either because he was going to surrender eventually, or he was repositioning and gathering his troops for an even larger attack. Unfortunately, my worst fears came true on March 30th. I traveled back to my capital city at this point to try to establish a relationship with a nation in the south of the continent now that the blockade was gone, but I returned to see Lisbon, the second largest city in the nation, ablaze. As it turned out, Huitka mercenaries, aided by the coalition, in the darkness of the night, had dug tunnels underneath the sea and began torching the town. I tried to fight them off as much as I could, and while the citizens themselves did their best, in the end, the city of Lisbon was impossible to recover. Sumo had sent me a message. He wasn't done fighting, and he would do anything to get his way. I marched back to my home infuriated. I didn't want my people to suffer any longer, and with no one left to turn to, I turned to the divine. In the darkness of the night, on March 31st, I pleaded with my goddess Entropa. Surely she could end this war. Then she turned to me and told me that tomorrow, vengeance was coming. That she would give my army her full strength, and we would win once and for all with the power of a legendary general known as Jazon. She told me to prepare my army, as the outcome of tomorrow's battle would, in the end, determine the fate of the entire server. Would Entropa live or die? I woke up early that next morning to the sounds of TNT explosions. I looked out my window and saw that my city of Fairfin, my capital city, was under siege. The coalition, as mentioned prior, sailed into my capital city's harbor, began shelling us with TNT cannons, and began a naval assault. Panic had ensued. It had begun. Minecraft's Battle of Nations. I grabbed my armor and headed outside to see both my soldiers and Entropy's minions fighting side by side against nations from all corners of the globe. More people kept on showing up as more reinforcements on both sides were called, and people just began to attack anyone they saw in a massive heap of confusion. I eventually pushed my way into Fairfin's central storage area so that I could grab some more arrows. When I was finally spotted by coalition military leaders, I began to be targeted. I felt my armor smashing to bits as they pelted me with arrows and slashed me with their swords. I thought that I was done, right then and there. Until a group of Entropy worshippers formed a shield around me and began blocking the arrows. They somewhat forced the coalition army back to the outskirts of the city, and we began to regroup until an end portal had opened. Jazon, the military general, has arrived. Entropy's minions suddenly disappeared and began flying southward towards the Argu Sands, leaving me and my wounded soldiers alone in Fairfin Central Plaza. As the coalition noticed this, they began to pick off my remaining men one by one and began to march back into the city. I called for Entropy to return, but I was answered with silence. The coalition sat me down and began to talk. Mobius, a Bardonian military leader, asked me a barrage of questions.
Rex, you are hereby under arrest by the authority of the World Coalition for more accounts than I can name. Yeah, that's what you think. My goddess Entropy will save me. She'll be back soon. She'll be back soon. Rex, she won't. She doesn't care about you. Don't you dare say that. I don't understand. Why do any of this? Why secede? Why escalate this conflict into a world war by siding with someone who wants to end life as we know it? I did it to save the Emperor of Huitka, my good friend Rex. Entropy helped me destroy the moon so I can get lunar cheese to heal him. Rex. Sumo went against the will of Infinix, so I had to stand up for him. Entropy gave me that power
to show him who's boss.
Rex! My men intercepted a letter from Infinix on the way here to Fairfin. You better read this. The cheese didn't work? Rex, the cheese never even existed in the first place. It's just lunar rock that she disguised. And Sumo's not even a dictator. He was just protecting his nation from you and from her. What? Look, from my understanding, Entropy is the one who made Infinix sick in the first place, so that she could manipulate someone weak-minded within his inner circle, you, into destroying the moon, unleashing her power, and bringing the realms of the void and the overworld close enough so that her minions could jump the gap and destroy our world as we know
it. It was then and there I realized she took advantage of me while I was in this vulnerable position, mourning my friend's illness, and made me give her my strength and help her release a world-eating monster known as Jazon. He was not a general. My reality came crashing down. Everything I'd worked towards thus far had been a lie. With a new light, I stood up, shook Mobius's hand, and joined the side of the coalition. I started this mess, and I, out of all people, intended to fix it. Later that afternoon, myself and the coalition projected the path of Entropy spirits and departed from Fairfin southward toward the Argu Plains. There, we saw a transformed landscape, massive spikes of obsidian and stone galore, and a massive amount of fire and lava. In the center, atop the largest pillar, was Jazon himself. This was Minecraft's Battle of Nations. the world versus the divine. As we marched toward the charred landscape, Entropy's minions descended from the pillars and rained fire upon us. Ghasts appeared, and all hell broke loose. While initially players were fighting in an uncoordinated fashion, after realizing one person couldn't stand the strength of one of Entropy's minions, players split into groups of 5 and began taking them on together. But after minutes of non-stop lightning strikes and PvP, players began to notice, no matter how hard they were hit, never seemed to die. People were dropping like flies. That is, until a user named Story Studio noticed a beacon atop of one of the pillars, which seemed to be giving strength to the spirits. They began to ascend the pillar, dodging all explosives that were thrown at them. Soon enough, the beacon was destroyed, and it was immediately noticeable that the fighting capabilities of the minions faltered. The spirits were picked off, one by one. Then we turned towards the main target, Jazzon. He stood atop the tower in rage, and sent yet another wave of ghouls to try to stop the players from ascending, but it was no use. We slowly crawled our way to the top, and at least a dozen of us, myself included, began to fight Jazzon head on.
Despite the constant attacks, he held out. Jazzon was looking for something, or someone. Suddenly, amidst the chaos, he singled me out. Jazzon pushed everyone else off, grabbed me, and began to drag me towards the end portal in the center of the tower.
Traitor!
He screamed,
"You will pay for your crimes against Entropy."
I thought that we were done, that the world had lost, until Jazzon was knocked aside by an arrow, shot by none other than Sumo. He rushed over to me and helped me up. The two of us reconciled and teamed up to fight Jazzon together. We blasted ourselves in the air with TNT, and with one fellow swoop, we hit him with our axes, ending him once and for all. The Battle of Nations was over. The world had won, and the divine had fallen.
Bruh.